Hey, I'm Trevor Chakudi, and if you're waking up throughout the night, then you may be suffering from hypoglycemia, and this is what I want to talk about in this video, is what you might be able to do to stop that happening and get a really good night's sleep. If you're new to the videos, please like our videos, share them around, subscribe to our YouTube channel, turn on notifications. We're always here trying to get information out to people, and it's the easiest way we can, and we'll keep you updated with our newest videos as they come out. But anyway, let's get into it, because hypoglycemia is way more common than people think. And let me discuss what hypoglycemia it is, because glycemia really does mean sugar. That's what we were talking about, sugar in the bloodstream. And a hypo is a low levels. This is what we're talking about, is low levels of sugar within your bloodstream. So if you've ever had a fasting glucose test done, maybe you've been to your GP and they've done labs and they had a fasting glucose test. Perhaps you've had a fasting glucose test done just from a finger prick test. This is really what we're talking about as a basis of all this, is understanding what the normal range of fasting glucose is, because the range generally that we're given in most labs is a pathological range, and that is that if you're outside that range, it means you have some kind of a condition. But from what we've seen over the years, the actual functional range seems to be a lot lower, where people actually function best in. So for most, what we tend to see most people function best in is a range of about 4.8 to 5.1. That's where most people seem to function best. If we're going below this 4.8, this is what we call hypoglycemia. This is when the blood sugars are getting really, really low. And if we're dropping below 4, this is where it gets really serious. This is getting outside that normal range completely. And if we're dropping down into the low 3s and even into the 2s, then we can also run the risk of getting into comas and the like from such a low sugar level, which hopefully is not something that you're concerned about. But hypoglycemia, or functional hypoglycemia, does affect sleep. Let me explain how. So when you go to bed at night here, let's say you have a normal healthy blood sugar when you go to sleep. If you've just eaten, for instance, then what normally happens when you eat, let's go back away from sleep for a second. If you eat, then what will happen is that we get this slight elevation in glucose over a period of time, and that doesn't matter what you eat. You could eat protein, you could eat carbohydrate, your sugar, whatever it is, and you'll get this elevation. And then what happens as a result of that is that we get a release of this hormone called insulin. And when insulin gets released, that helps break the sugar down, the carbohydrate down, the glucose if you want, into 3 major things. And that is energy that's utilized immediately, stored glucose called glycogen in the muscle and the liver, and then fat that's also stored around your midline. When we start getting insulin that goes too high though, when we get a really high level of insulin release in response to eating, this can sometimes trigger a dramatic drop in our blood sugars, and we end up in this hypoglycemic range, something which is often known as reactive hypoglycemia. The problem is, once we get down into this bottom area down here, the only way to get it back up is either to eat or to release our stress hormones, namely a hormone known as cortisol. The problem with it is that cortisol, the main time, you think about it, the main time that cortisol gets released is first thing in the morning, and that's mainly because we use it to wake up and get our systems going. So let's imagine this is a nighttime response. You've had dinner, you've gone to bed, you're in bed, and all of a sudden we have this dip that comes down. The result is cortisol gets released. As it gets released, the brain thinks it's morning, and awake you go. And this is pretty classic of people that we see that wake up somewhere around the 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning mark from our experience here. So what we want to do is we want to stop this up and down process, and we want to make this blood sugar pattern look something a little bit more stable. So something that looks perhaps something more like this, rather than this high and low pattern. So there's a few things that you can do to stop that from happening. The first thing you can do is to avoid eating later at night. So if we have a really large meal, especially if it's carbohydrate based, if we have a really large meal at night before bed, often we'll get this huge release of insulin to break it down, and we get this reactive hypoglycemia that occurs. Reduce the simple carbohydrates, the simple sugars in your diet. That's another really, really big one. So the sweets, the lollies, the chocolates, the cakes, get rid of dessert, that high sugar concentration dessert late at night. These are the big things that will also trigger this pattern off. The other thing with it as well is that if we are having those type of foods on a regular basis, this tends to lead to something known as insulin resistant. And that's when the cells the receptors of the cells themselves start no longer responding to insulin, and the result is we need to release more insulin to have the same effect. And this can result in this high level of insulin being generated. The next one is to shift more towards a fat-orientated diet rather than a carbohydrate-orientated diet. Doesn't mean you need to go keto, but we need to go more towards a high-fat diet to help stop these peaks and troughs that occur with excessive carbohydrate intake. It just helps control it. It'll also help reduce inflammation and things like that. There's a few other things you can do in terms of supplements. Magnesium is amazing at doing this. Magnesium is a really, really important mineral used in a lot of enzymatic reactions. One of the big things that is used for, though, is the metabolism of glucose. So magnesium is really important. Chromium is another one that is also involved in that. Vitamin B1 is another one that can we use as well. There's a few different ones there. If we can stabilize the stress pattern, help your adrenal glands produce cortisol and do it in a more functional manner, sometimes this will reduce our hypoglycemic troughs as well and help us get out of it quickly and help negate that. So herbs such as cordyceps, ginseng, rhodiola, these are all adaptogens that help regulate stress better. And there's also a really awesome fat called phosphatidylserine, which is often sold as a memory agent to improve memory. But what phosserine is, it's actually a fat that's used in the membranes, especially in your hippocampus and your temporal lobe. And by stimulating that, it improves hippocampal function, which is why we end up with improved memory. But the improved hippocampal function also means that we have an improvement in our stress mechanisms as well. And the final one I'm going to look at is aerobic-based exercise. This is not aerobics, this is aerobic exercise. And aerobic exercise is fantastic, mainly because aerobic exercise tends to improve fat metabolism. It's a very parasympathetic, very calming, vagal type of activity. So this is just keeping your heart rate really low and doing longer periods of exercise. And in doing that, will help improve fat metabolism, which reduces the emphasis on carbohydrate for energy metabolism, which can in turn also help regulate this. There's one other one that's really important to stop these peaks and troughs, and that is to eat often. Our screen's gone a bit crazy there, but to eat often. So if you're eating often and frequently grazing throughout the day, this will also help this pattern in terms of stopping the troughs occurring. But really the big thing when it comes to sleep, all these are fantastic, and these are long-term effects to try and negate your hypoglycemia, because hypoglycemia ironically can lead to type 2 diabetes. So we want to do all these things to try and negate that, but the big ones really is let's watch those last meals at night, okay? Don't eat late, and make sure we're keeping away from those simple sugars late in the evening. If you have any questions with that information at all, please feel free to message me or post up below. Always happy to help. Please like our page and subscribe to our channels, and we're always there to get information to help you in any way we can. We'll catch you soon.